Welcome back to another FPL Best Wildcard Team video and podcast, this time out of Double Gameweek 37, the last Double Gameweek of the season, and the penultimate one for the entire campaign. I'm going to build the best 15-man squad, and you can't use two chips in the same game week, of course, but if you did wildcard beforehand, this video and podcast will help you in terms of the bench boost for Game Week 37, but also for the final game week of the season, so everything will be covered to get the very best options in FPL, and of course, those wildcarding right now, and it is a very late time to use it, but it can still do a really good job in terms of pushing up the ranks and getting you to where you want to be. Smash the like button and subscribe for new. Let's try to get this video to the 200 likes and let's keep on pushing towards 25k subscribers and beyond. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the other links in the description below, especially my Patreon, Spotify, and Amazon Music. It goes a long way to supporting the channel. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. With the bench boost, you'd be tempted to go for two goalkeepers who have a double game week, and that's completely understandable. But when I look at the goalkeeper options, apart from Petrovic on current form, the others don't really fill me with confidence. Ederson just somehow finds a way to constantly blank, whilst the likes of Gavardio get the attacking returns. You got Vicario in a Spurs side that have lost 4 games in a row, and they face Man City in Double Gameweek 37. Then you have Onana, who just shipped 4 goals into Crystal Palace. He had a terrible performance himself, but defensively, that's the main problem for United. They can see too many chances and goals. So when it really comes down to it, in terms of double gameweek goalkeepers, only Petrovic stands out, and that's why I would go for him. Chelsea are in great form since that 5-0 defeat to Arsenal. They found a way to get things clicking. Cucurella inverting into the midfield and pushing higher up. That's been key as well. And Caicedo has had some great performances in the last couple of matches. So in terms of one double gameweek goalkeeper I would highlight, it undoubtedly would be Petrovic. And if you want to go for a second one, it's between Ederson or Onana. But for those wildcarding in Game Week 37 and you want a good goalkeeper for the last game week in 38, I would go for David Raya, and I'd actually triple up on Arsenal on the wildcard. Arsenal the only team worth doubling up on, in my opinion, and I would go for either Gabriel, Saliba, or Ben White, depending on your budget, but I don't think much separates the three of them. Ben White has been the most consistent since January with goals and assists. Over the course of the season, though, Gabriel, I think, just posed the most goal threat, and he had a great goal chalked off for offside against Bournemouth, and it was a shame, but it was the correct decision. As for Saliba, I think he's the best for bonus points in this calendar year, but it was Gabriel who got 7 points against Bournemouth, despite being quite shaky in that match. So take your pick from those three. I've gone for Gabriel because he's the cheapest and most accessible, but I honestly wouldn't mind Ben White or Saliba, and because Ben White is the lowest owned of the three, I'd be very tempted to go for him if funds are no issue for you. Now, the second defender I'm going for could be rotated in one of these games in Game Week 37, but I'm going to go for Gavardio, and you also have Kyle Walker to cover that Man City defence. Akanji could also be a shout, but it's so difficult to nail on that one Man City defender who will start every single game remaining. Only 3 matches left, so it doesn't seem that big of a deal, but honestly, with Pep Guardiola and Manchester City's defenders, I honestly think it is, and that's why I went for Ederson in the first place on my wildcard, but that has resulted in a 20-point swing in a matter of 2 game weeks, and it goes to show the fine margins and variance that can happen in FPL. But Gavardio is my current preference in the Man City defence. Just don't be surprised if he is rotated in Game Week 37. Now, the third defender I'm going to go for is a single game week option, but if you were to start any single game week defender this week, it would be from Everton, and I'm going for Branthwaite. Now, for the final game of the season against Arsenal, Everton could spoil the party by then, but I honestly think he's very benchable in that fixture, and he's good bench cover for this week. You could even start him if you wish, but I'm going to go for 2 other double game week defenders in 37 and start a back 3, and it includes Dan Burn, who has been very frustrating, but if we're being completely honest, the choices we have in this defensive line are very limited, because with Man City, for example, you probably have a triple up already and you want 2, possibly 3 attackers. Then with Chelsea, Petrovic is already enough cover defensively, and Jackson's in great form. Cole Palmer is essential, so that trip up is almost locked in as well. Then with Newcastle, you've got a lot of attacking options as well, and then you go for a Dan Burn at the back or a Lewis Hall, Livramento, and then in the goalkeeper position, we don't know if Dubravka will start both games in 37. My gut feeling is he starts one, whilst Nick Pope starts the other, but it all depends on the fitness of Nick Pope, who returned to the squad against his former club Burnley. But I think Burn is a cheap option. There is a chance of a clean sheet there, especially if Man United turn up the way they did against Palace. They could get absolutely battered once again. But the final defender is Pedro Porro, and yes, he's been awful in this calendar year, and Spurs have been shocking defensively, 4 losses in a row, but I think they'll keep a clean sheet against Burnley, and if not, in the final game of the season against Sheffield United, I think they could keep one, and Porro has one more attacking return in him, in my opinion. And even against Man City, who are the overwhelming favourites for that match, I still think Spurs can cause them trouble, and they've done so in the last couple of years. They've had a few very poor runs, then they're going to Man City away or at home, and they manage to get a result. So that could be the case once again, and I think this defensive line is probably the best to go for on the wildcard in Game Week 37. With the midfield, it's a similar story. I would go for a lot of double game week midfielders, but I'm going to have a single game week option as well, who is primed and ready for game week 38, and you can even start him this week and get a lot of returns as well. But Phil Foden for me is still the best Man City asset, period. But Erling Haaland on his current form is very difficult to ignore, and for the captaincy, I think a lot of us will gravitate towards him. But Phil Foden is still worth it if you want to go a bit different with the captaincy, and the same goes for Cole Palmer, who won't be a differential captain by any stretch of the imagination, but compared to Erling Haaland, the effective ownership will be much lower, and I think these two are the best midfielders in the game right now. But there is another option, another Englishman and a star talent, and that is Bukayo Saka, who doesn't double this week, but is facing Manchester United away from home. He has a great record against the Red Devils, and he could honestly score in this game. He actually did so in the last meeting at Old Trafford. He got an assist earlier this season, had a poor performance, but before that, I think he scored against Man United in 4 successive games, and that was a record for an Arsenal player. So I really think Saka can turn up and deliver, but I'm more including him for Game Week 38 against Everton at home, and you could go for Kai Havertz if money is an issue. And to be fair, Kai Havertz has been in great form in this entire calendar year with the most goal contributions of any Premier League player. I'd also go for Anthony Gordon, and you might be thinking, where are the Man United players? And Dalot at the back or Onana in goal could still be decent, but I can't really advocate that double up. I might do it for my own team selection, and I'll talk about why in that video and podcast. And then Bruno Fernandes in the midfield. I think he'll return for the game against Arsenal. 2 home games. If you were to go for any Man United player, go for Bruno Fernandes, and I wouldn't mind going for Bruno over Saka on the wildcard in 37, then swapping them for Game Week 38. That could also be the play, but one of these 8 attackers will be benched regardless, and that's why I've gone for Saka, and you'd start him, of course, in Game Week 38. He could even be a great captaincy option as well. But the final midfielder is Heung-min Son. Once again, going down to that Burnley game, he has a great record against them and also against Manchester City. Then you've got Sheffield United to round off the season, and despite how poor Spurs have been, I think they will respond and get 2 victories from the remaining 3 matches, potentially even get a draw as well in the process. So I do think Spurs will bounce back. Heung-min Son has been quite underwhelming with his overall performances, but he's still been finding a way to score goals. He scored that consolation against Arsenal and Liverpool, and it all comes down to Spurs' mentality and their defending. If they can find a way to not go 4-0 down or 3-0 down after half-time, that would be great, of course, but Heung-min Son can still score regardless of the game situations, and he's the best Spurs asset by far. If you want to go for a second Spurs attacker, I would go for Richarlison. James Maddison is completely off form, and with Brennan Johnson, the minutes are going to increase now with Timo Werner out for the rest of the season, but there is rotation with Richarlison. You could see Son playing on the left-hand side and then the Brazilian up front. So really, it's Son and Richarlison to go for in the Spurs attack, but I don't think you need a triple up in Spurs given their current form. When building my Game Week 35 wildcard squad a couple of weeks back, a lot of people doubted Nicholas Jackson in the comments, and that's completely understandable. I doubted him myself, but I still looked at him compared to the other strikers who have doubles in 35 and 37, and I thought he was by far the best option. Only Watkins and Isak, and of course Erling Haaland, were above Jackson in the pecking order, but there's also the issue of budget, and if I had extra money, I probably would have gone for Watkins, to be quite honest with you. But apart from Isak and Haaland, I still thought Jackson was the best who had double game weeks remaining in the forward position. Rasmus Højlund has been completely off it since returning from injury, and he only got that goal against Sheffield United and a bonus point, and that's about it. He can still be a decent option for double game week 37, and another one to consider is Callum Wilson, but given his current form and the fixtures, I would go for Nicholas Jackson on the wild card, and the best Chelsea triple up is Palmer, Petrovic and Nicholas Jackson, in my opinion. I'd rather double up on them offensively than go for a defensive double up, but that's all down to personal opinion, and Chelsea are keeping clean sheets against Tottenham and West Ham, which is very impressive to say the least. But Erling Haaland is essential at this point, and no one expected him to score 4 goals against Wolves. That early penalty did help a lot, and I don't think it was a penalty, but then you could say the same thing about Saka in that game against Bournemouth, and Haaland is just a great player, a great striker who has that clinical edge to him. He has missed a lot of big chances this season, and you could look at last season and think, oh well, he's being a bit underwhelming this year, but that's really high standards that he's set. And as I mentioned a few weeks ago, I always thought he'd win the Golden Boot if he can stay fit. And those 4 goals against Wolves has completely sealed the deal there. And it's also a reason why I got a red arrow in FPL. But the final forward is Isak. A lot of triple ups in this wildcard team with Newcastle, Man City and Chelsea, and also Arsenal, which might be a bit differential at this stage of the season. But I think that's the best way to go about it if you're wildcarding in Gameweek 37. Now, would I buy Arsenal players right now? Not necessarily. I'd buy them for Gameweek 38, but they could do well against Man United, especially if the Red Devils turn up the way they did against Crystal Palace. They could be absolutely obliterated on Sunday, but I don't think that'll be the case. I think Man United will respond, and it'll be a very tough game for the Gunners, and it could be very cagey and nervy, but you could start an Arsenal player or two. I wouldn't mind it. I just wouldn't advocate an Arsenal triple up and start Raya, Gabriel, Saliba or White, depending on who you pick there, or a Havertz and Saka. I think starting all of them at the same time in Gameweek 37 isn't ideal, and a lot of double Gameweek players will outscore the Arsenal assets in Gameweek 37, but they're in place for Gameweek 38. And if you want to see the best bench boost team and all of that, be sure to let me know in the comments section. I might make a separate video on it, but I do cover that in my team selection because I'll be activating the bench boost this week. In fact, it's already activated and it's just a matter of fine-tuning a few details, as I've got Bruno Fernandes who's doubtful, Harry Maguire's out for the next couple of weeks, and a few other problems here and there which need to be addressed. But let's now head over to Drafthound and then FPL.team to discuss the starting 11 and also some alternative picks that you can go for on the wildcard in Double Gameweek 37. I would highly recommend you check out Drafthound. There's a link in the description below. Many of you have signed up using my link and talked about how useful this website is. They've gone for Raya and Olsen as the goalkeepers on the wildcard, but it's worth noting that Emi Martinez will return against Olympiacos in the Europa Conference League, according to reliable Argentine journalist Gaston Edul. In terms of the defenders, Gavardio, Pedro Porro is very similar as well to my wildcard squad, but they've gone for Chalobah to cover the Chelsea defence rather than Petrovic. If I were to go for a Chelsea defender right now, I'd go for Cucurella, who's been exceptional against West Ham and Tottenham, and this new inverted role has given him a new lease of life at Chelsea. They've gone for Gordon, Son, Palmer, De Bruyne and Johnson as the midfield 5, with Haaland and Isak up front. The bench includes Jackson, Hall and Ben White. Now, I personally would start Jackson over Johnson, and if you're bench boosting, that would be a good squad, but I would improve on Olsen, who won't even start in the remaining gameweeks of the season. And I don't think Aston Villa will keep a clean sheet regardless. It's a good squad by Drafthound. There's a few details I don't agree with, but Raya, Gavardio, Pedro Porro, Gordon, Son, Palmer, going for a Man City midfielder like De Bruyne or Foden, and also Haaland, Isak and Jackson, all identical to what I discussed in my Wildcard Team video and podcast, even going for an Arsenal defender and also a Newcastle one. They've gone for Hall, I went for Burn, and they went for Ben White, which would be my preference if possible, but I don't think there's much in it between him, Gabriel and Saliba. Let's now head over to FPL.team and discuss the starting 11 for my wildcard squad and the captaincy. Between the sticks, I would go for Petrovic. David Raya would be on the bench, of course. Dan Burn, Gavardio and Pedro Porro completes the back line with Palmer, Son, Foden and Gordon forming part of the midfield 4. Then Haaland, Isak and Jackson up front, which is the template front three at the moment. The bench comprises of Raya, Saka, Branthwaite and Gabriel. But as I mentioned earlier, I wouldn't mind starting an Arsenal player or two. I just wouldn't go overboard with a triple up, and I still think Man United could turn up, and if you want those assets, Bruno Fernandes in the midfield is by far the best option. Then Dalot in the defence can be decent on his day, but he's been in awful form recently. Onana in goal, and also Rasmus Højlund up front, but going for 3 United players right now is just not worth it. I probably will, if not at least 2 Man United players, but if possible, I'll try to talk myself out of it, and I'll be delving into that in the team selection video and podcast. In terms of the captaincy, Erling Haaland will be the very template pick after his 4 goals against Wolverhampton Wanderers. And then you've got Palmer, Son and Foden really to rival him for the captaincy. I think all of them are worth consideration. And I also would consider Jackson on his current form or Isak, but I would kind of stick to a select few and choose between them reliable picks that are consistent week in, week out really. So Haaland, Palmer, Son, Foden, and I'd probably put Son at the bottom of that list right now, but I really think he could deliver against Burnley and Manchester City. The expected points is 112.3, and that's actually very good considering none of the bench players count towards that score. For example, my bench boost squad does have around 130 to 140 expected points, so the bench boost could be massive this week. Let's see if the double game week players finally deliver, but it's worth considering single game week options like Saka, Branthwaite, Gabriel, any Arsenal defender really like White or Saliba, Havertz, and there are others there like Salah who could really perform against Aston Villa, so I wouldn't discount anybody in this game week, but there are certain teams you want to pile up on, and I believe that's Man City, Chelsea, Spurs, and Newcastle. I think those are the 4 best double game week teams, but Man United could still throw in a few surprises, and if you've got the likes of Bruno Fernandes, I'd highly recommend keeping him as well. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. Let's try to get this video to the 200 likes and let's keep on pushing towards 25k subscribers and beyond. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the other links in the description below for my Patreon, the channel memberships, Discord server, FPL League, FPL Challenge, Drafthound, as well as Spotify and Amazon Music. Follow me on those platforms and leave a 5-star review on my podcast. I wish you all the best of luck for Double Gameweek 37 and the rest of the season, and I'll see you next time.